it was very difficult in the beginning. And so for about a year, I didn't think I was experiencing any benefits at all. We had set this very simple goal of 10 minutes a day in silence, and I couldn't even do that. A lot of times I would abort the mission like at 5 minutes in because I just couldn't sit any longer or be still any longer. But over time, I began to notice in my outer life, even though my moments in solitude and silence were still difficult and I was still chafing a little bit against it and I was still struggling with distraction and all of that, I was noticing a different quality of being in my life, though, that I was becoming a person who was calmer, that I would, in situations with people, I would have a knowing, a sense of what was really called for in the moment, and I would be able to act out of that place rather than being reactive or compulsive in my responses to people. I began to receive real guidance for my life that was in many ways different than what my human wisdom might have come up with, but it was more right than anything that I had ever experienced before. And I was also able to start to get in touch with some of the roots of my compulsive drivenness, to begin to understand that the roots of that had to do with my lack of self-esteem, my lack of a sense of self, apart from all of my doing and all of my performing, and where that came from. And solitude and silence became moments when I could actually let go of that for a little while and just experience the fact that God loves me and values me, even when I'm sitting quietly in His presence, and as much as when I'm out there in the world doing great things for Him. And so I began to have a greater sense of God with me in the depths of my being. I began to have a greater sense of who I was in God, and that began to settle down the compulsiveness because I was more satisfied with who I was in God, and I had a greater sense of myself as a person of worth purely for the fact that God had created me to be the person that I was. And so then I was bringing a different quality of person to my work, and found out too that when we're functioning from a deeper sense of who we are in God, we're much more effective in the way that we are in the world, so we don't have to work so hard at it. So there's a kind of freedom that comes and a kind of calm. So I did, over time, begin to experience my own soul becoming that jar of river water that had sat still long enough so that the water of my soul was settling and it was clearer, and I could hear God. I could experience God's love for me unconditionally. I could receive the wisdom that He had for me. And so big changes, subtle changes, but very, very real changes. And I will say also that the actual whole trajectory of my vocational life changed as a result of that as well. And so what I'm doing now in my life is much truer to who I am than if I had continued on the path that I had been on without entering into solitude and silence.